Hello guys, and welcome to my new video, and today we're going to be looking at the state of healing for patch 10.07 because there's been quite a few changes in terms of what is perceived to be the healer meta both in raids and Mythic Plus, and we're going to be looking at all content in terms of PvE. Big disclaimer before I'm doing this video, I wanted to wait as long as possible before looking at some of the HPS logs, before looking at some of the real player information, because there's quite a few classes that still have class breaking bugs that, again, some of them have been resolved very recently, but they're not being reflected in these HPS logs, or some classes still have these bugs and they're not showing the true representation of what the healing balance could be. And this is somewhat expected because with any new patch there is quite a few bugs with classes, and it takes a week or two to fix them, and then you kind of get a better picture of where every class is sitting. I have personally been testing a lot of raids, a lot of Mythic Plus environments. I've been testing the new rings because the rings went through a roller coaster of emotions in terms of tuning and balancing. I think they're very strong right now, and I think most people should pick up DPS or healing rings depending if you're doing Mythic Plus or raid. But we're looking at raid performance, and this is, you can see right here, this is Vault Incarnates, this is Mythic. We're looking at 75 percentile because I feel like it might show a better, or it might showcase a better balance for healers, because if you're playing your healer a little bit above average, you might see similar numbers in your raids. Again, there has been a lot of shifting here, and probably the biggest one you can see here is Preservation of Ochre. Now, Preservation of Ochre did have a substantial amount of nerfs coming into 10.07. It was very expected it was going to dip from being the top HPS healer to being somewhat lower, but the dip is probably bigger than what most people expected. That's also to do with the fact that Preservation of Ochre still have some major issues or bugs present with the class, and specifically Dream Breath not hitting 5 targets all the time. And again, this is a pretty big issue because Dream Breath is one of your top heals in majority of content out there. So I'm expecting Preservation of Ochre to climb a little bit higher when those issues are going to be resolved. My opinions based on testing. I've tested a lot of Preservation of Ochre in raids. I've tested out multiple different builds. Again, I think a lot of people are still unsure about what the meta build is going to be, because some people are trying out talents like Ouroboros, some people are trying out hybrid builds, some people are going pure into that Emerald Blossoms build and just seeing where that's going to take them. And I think there isn't a pure or best build available right now. People are still testing. The biggest issue for me with Preservation of Ochre in terms of, again, I've been doing the re-clears with Preservation of Ochre, running a very similar build that I ran in 10.05, and a lot of the times where I have to do my Emerald Communion ramp, or Emerald Communion ramp is really important to keep people alive, it felt really weak. And a lot of the times I couldn't even get enough echoes out there to provide a substantial Emerald Communion ramp, which meant that I would have to reshuffle my raid cooldowns, because honestly, Emerald Communion felt pretty hard to execute or even get good healing out of it, which is probably the biggest issue that I've seen with Evoker so far, outside of the issues with Dream Breath. So I think a lot of people are angry or scared about what's happening to Preservation Evokers, and it doesn't help that Evoker got nerfs and they have substantial bugs with the class, meaning that they're not really doing that well in raids. But if you go back to the charts, again, Evoker is doing less than they're supposed to, and I think this is going to throw off a lot of Preservation Evoker mains out there who specifically raid. But in terms of other healers, the biggest surprise, or maybe not the biggest surprise, but we have a new HPS king, or whatever you want to call it, and that is Restoration Shaman. Resto Shaman changes. I talked about the Shaman changes. I thought Shaman is going to do really well in Mythic Plus environment. I expected them to climb in raids, but they kind of did better than what I expected in raid environments. I think there is a lot of happy Resto Shamans right now. Tidebringer is what I call Changebringer. This is such a substantial talent that's been introduced in 10.07 that makes Shaman feel a lot more versatile. A lot of times where people are spread, Tidebringer is going to bridge the gap between feeling relatively useless to feeling pretty strong. So I think a lot of Shamans are going to be happy. I think the Shaman changes are pretty interesting. I think there's going to be an influx of new Resto Shamans coming into 10.07 and coming into 10.1, purely because Shaman HPS is looking good. And we'll talk about Mythic Plus balance later down the video, keep that in mind. So Shaman is doing really well. There has been issues with Shaman that have been resolved in terms of Swirling Currents and the contribution from Swirling Currents to Cloudburst Totem. So there is, again, issues with majority of healing classes. Resto Druid, again, it's kind of doing what it used to do. It's not getting or received too many changes in 10.07. I think it's going to be a solid healer no matter what, both in Mythic Plus and raids. Mistweaver Monk got some quality of life improvements in terms of Shadow's Gift, but I think the Shadow's Gift change is more impactful than something like Mythic Plus environment. Mistweaver Monk is actually a really strong healer, but no one seems to play them, so there's issues with the community in terms of the size of the player base to Mistweavers, I think Mistweaver is a very solid healer and it's only going to get better in 10.1. Holy Paladin climbed a little bit in terms of the changes. I wasn't sure about Holy Paladin changes overall because there were pages and pages of changes. Holy Paladin was kind of hit by Retribution Paladin rework, and a lot of the changes were aimed at Retribution Paladin, but I think Holy Paladin is doing pretty well. And again, Holy Priest, there is a big issue with Holy Priest. Divine Image contribution in terms of damage and healing is not being attributed to the actual Holy Priest himself, and it'll do damage and healing depending on how you're playing your Holy Priest, but it will not be attributed to you. That has been fixed, so I'm expecting Holy Priest to try out Divine Image a lot more and possibly climb in the healing meters as well, so that's going to be interesting, and Discipline Priest is probably going to stay where it is. So the summary of raid balance, again, we're looking at these HPS charts. It is very, very important that the goal of these HPS charts, it's not for all of the healers to have an equal HPS, because these HPS charts do not show damage reduction cooldowns. For example, Holy Paladin with Devotion Aura plus Aura Mastery. That damage reduction is not going to be attributed in these HPS logs. For example, Discipline Priest Barrier, 25% damage reduction if people are stacked. That is not going to be attributed here. And even the Spirit Link damage reduction, again, Spirit Link has damage reduction portion to it, it's not going to be shown up. The goal is not to have every single healer have the exact same HPS. That was the issue in the previous expansions. If you played previous expansions, you're probably fully aware of the fact that Holy Paladin and Discipline Priest used to be the kings of raid performance, because they would do the same or even better HPS than something like Restoration Druid. But then you would say, hey, why would I bring Resto Druid who's doing the same amount of HPS as Holy Paladin, but Holy Paladin is doing more HPS because damage reduction cooldowns are not being shown? So Blizzard needs to be very, very, very careful about how they're going to balance the healers in raid performance, because if you have damage reduction healers doing the same amount of healing that everyone else, you're going to have damage reduction healers being stacked. And I do want to say a couple of things about Preservation of Evoker, because when Preservation of Evoker was OP before patch 10.0.7, it was like 10-15% ahead of everyone else in terms of, or at least majority of other healers in terms of HPS. No one was really looking at the downfall or the limitations of Preservation of Evoker, and that is specifically 30-yard range to majority of your heals. Now that Preservation of Evoker might be mid-tier, or how do I say, a lot of other healers are going to be dealing or doing as much HPS as Evoker, you might ask yourself, why would I bring a Preservation of Evoker who has 30-yard limitation to majority of their spells versus something like a Restoration Druid? This is another thing that Blizzard needs to be very, very careful when looking at balancing the new class. When Evoker was OP, no one was looking at their limitations, but now if Evoker is going to be mid-tier, I think there is going to be questions asked about their limitations, because they are substantial. Now, I know a lot of people are listening to this and they're like, well, my class also has limited range, I don't have all my abilities on 40 yards and things like that, but there's a big caveat to this. There's a big difference between, for example, Mistweaver Monk Ancient Teachings having 30-yard range versus an Evoker whose 90% of heals are 30 yards. There is a big, big difference between that. I am a little bit worried about the balance coming into from 10.07 to 10.1, because I think Evoker needs to have a reason to be invited in raids, because it has a lot of reasons not to be invited in raids, especially if you're going to have a spread fight in 10.01, or for example, if Emerald Blossoms is going to be the main way to play Preservation of Evoker on spread fights, and the range limitation of Evoker could really bite them in the ass coming into the next patch, but that is just my 2 cents. So now let's go and look at Mythic Plus in terms of real player information using subcreation data based on these affixes. Again, this is, I shouldn't even be using subcreation anymore, because I think a lot of the data is skewed. A lot of people play the healers that are really strong at the start of the expansion, and they keep playing them because they don't want to reroll, and there's a huge snowball effect that's happening here. I know for a fact Mistweaver Monk is probably high A tier right now. It does good damage, it does healing. And again, probably the biggest issue with Mistweaver Monk is that it does not bring some of the big utility that other healers provide. For example, Bloodlust or Balrez or things like Mark of the Wild that Resto Druid provides. So it's lacking something in that really strong utility. But Mistweaver Monk is actually a really, really solid healer right now. For example, Holy Priest, it has that issue with Divine Image not being attributed to the actual Holy Priests themselves. So maybe the community perception is still not going to increase because of that, but it's been resolved. I think Holy Priest is doing a lot better with the changes to Divine Image and things like that. We'll have to see if more Holy Priests are going to try out the new combo, because again, give it a little bit more time. And in terms of other healers, I can tell you with fair certainty that I've been testing a lot of Restoration Shaman, I've been testing a lot of 25 keys, 26 keys, I've been testing Preservation of Evoker in a lot of 25 keys, I've been testing out the new ring in terms of pure HPS, in terms of pure damage, and Resto Shaman at the very least is as good as Preservation of Evoker right now, and maybe even surpasses Preservation of Evoker in certain fights, especially to do with range limitations, because Tidebringer is so, how do I say it, game changer. In terms of new S tier healers, I would absolutely put Restoration Shaman as the new S tier healer right now. I think Restoration Shaman changes have been really nice. I think the fact that you have a sort of a tank cooldown, you do have Earth Shield that provides 6% damage reduction on tank, and you can maintain it pretty much 100% uptime. It feels better than having nothing. You do have Spirit Link in case the worst case situations, but there's so many things that I could talk about Restoration Shaman in terms of the changes. I made previous videos about this. I think Restoration Shaman is an absolute S tier right now, and you can play it and you can do really well. I think Preservation Evoker feels a lot better in Mythic Plus than it feels in Raids. I think Evoker is still S tier healer. I think it provides a lot of damage, a lot of healing, it provides a lot of utility, and Bloodlust. Bloodlust, these two healers provide insane amount of utility to that group composition, which a lot of groups will be looking for if they don't have something like Enhancement Shaman, because Enhancement Shaman is pretty OP right now. And Resto Druid, I think Resto Druid, no matter what expansion or no matter what patch you're looking for in Dragonflight, it's a very solid healer both in Mythic Plus and Raids. Again, it provides a lot of utility, it provides a decent amount of damage. You have to work a lot more for Resto Druid damage, but it provides decent amount of damage, it provides good healing. Again, the healer balance in Mythic Plus, it's a lot closer than what this data is showing. I would put a lot of these healers in A tier, and I would probably put Restoration Shaman in S tier, because I think it has achieved that S tier right now for 10.07. We'll have to see how 10.1 shapes up, because I think a lot of the balance for 10.1 is going to be purely based on the tier sets, and that is something to either be scared or happy about, because Resto Druid tier set has historically always been nice in Dragonflight. So to summarize the whole video, honestly, play whichever healer you enjoy the most, because the healer balance is very close both in Raids and Mythic Plus. I think the saying of no king rules forever has been applied to Preservation Evoker, especially in Raid environment. I think the fact that there has been nerfs to Evoker, plus the pretty groundbreaking bugs to Dream Breath, have made Evokers feel a lot weaker than they should be, which it's something that Blizzard should address right now, because I think a lot of people, or a lot of Evokers, are panicking already. I think Evoker feels a lot better in Mythic Plus. I think in terms of the healer that gained the most in patch 10.07, in my eyes, that is going to be Restoration Shaman. I think there's going to be quite a few people who are going to be re-rolling to Resto Shaman in 10.07 and prepare for 10.1. I think in 10.1, Mistweaver Monk should... I hope that there's going to be more people playing Mistweaver Monk, because it is one of the least represented healers in the game right now, and it is a lot stronger than what people make it out to be. I think Mistweaver Monk can also be very fun healer. Let me know why people are not playing Monk. Restoration Druid, I think it's one of those safe picks coming into something like 10.1 or playing right now in 10.07. I think a lot of people who are playing Resto Druid, they're just going to stick with Resto Druid. I think a lot of people who are playing Preservation Evoker, at least in Mythic Plus, are probably going to stick with Preservation Evoker in Mythic Plus. Maybe they will experiment with something like Restoration Shaman, because if they have a consistent group in Mythic Plus as Evoker, it's not hard to replace Evoker for Resto Shaman, because you still get that Bloodlust. Play whichever healer you enjoy the most, because the balance is very decent. Don't look at the HPS charts too much right now, because there's quite a few issues that will make certain healers a lot better in the next couple of days. At least, hopefully Blizzard is going to resolve them. Let me know how you feel about this video. If you like the content, please like and subscribe. It helps the channel, and I'll see you in my next video.